Tonight we're talking to the founder and leader of the Movement for Change. Some call them the Butterfly Movement, Alan Kojo Chemating. We're reflecting on his economic plan. Lots of discussions. This week, the current Vice President gave his speech at the UPSA. I'm sure you saw that earlier before this. In the course of the week, we interviewed Seth Tekpe, who is the former Minister of Finance. And he says Ghana is experiencing its worst punitive tax regime ever. Now, this is the former Minister of Finance, whose government was voted out in 2016, with an MPP government saying they were moving from taxation to production. Now, Seth Tekpe is saying that the tax regime is the most punitive. You don't work for MPP, you are an independent person, but I just want your thoughts on tax, because it's the biggest issue for the past 2 weeks. There's been emissions tax, people are angry, 15 to 21% VAT on electricity. Prior to that, in April, we had 3 new taxes. Income tax had been reviewed. There was excise duty that the FABAC didn't like. Then there was a new 5% before profit tax. We haven't even added a tariff adjustment for. So there's a lot of tax discussions. What are your own thoughts around how did we get here, right? How did we get from taxation to production back to taxation?
First, I think the biggest challenge we have with taxation in Ghana is that our tax regime is turned upside down. When I say upside down, if you look at the most successful economies in the world, and you look at the structure of their tax regime or the architecture of their tax regime, you find that the greater contribution to tax revenue is from direct taxes and not indirect taxes. In Ghana, we've turned this upside down for many years, and we've put more emphasis on indirect taxes than direct taxes. And the only reason why we've done so is because we think that it is easier for us to collect money from indirect taxes than from direct taxes. But if you look at what spurs growth and transformation in the economy, it is the private sector and not government. And if your indirect taxes, let's say duties, levies on imports, for example, in an economy that is highly import dependent, if that is the nature of your tax regime, then obviously it means that the cost of production in Ghana will be very high. Now, if your cost of production is high, it means that your private sector will not be competitive. If they are not competitive, they cannot compete on the domestic market, and they cannot compete on the export market. So it means that even though you think you are being smart, that it is easy for you to collect indirect taxes through duties, port duties and things like that. In fact, you are killing your private sector. If you kill your private sector, then they are not likely to be able to pay the contribution or pay taxes. So indirectly, you think you are collecting direct taxes, but then it means that you are also reducing their ability to contribute to corporate tax or direct taxes. So you are robbing Peter to pay Paul. Now, so that is a fundamental change that needs to occur. In those countries that understand what taxes do to an economy, they make sure that they reduce taxes and levies and make their private sector more competitive. When they've made money and they've made profits, then they can tax them. And then also, when the private sector grows and they employ more people, then it means that people can then contribute to direct taxes through payee. And then they can even afford consumption tax like VAT, because it is your ability to create jobs and create businesses that turns the economy around. So our whole tax regime structure is completely wrong, and that's where I will start from. Number 2, it's about the tax net and the tax base. If you have a large informal sector, then obviously you cannot apply your tax regime to a broad section of your population. And that is why in Ghana, only a few people are in the tax net. And then, because of that, the burden is very high. And they have no appetite to pay the taxes. So one of the things we need to do is to formalize the informal sector. And how do you do that? You do that by providing institutional support for the micro enterprises to grow into formal companies. And that was one of the things I did when...
Fair enough. But did you, in May last year, when you were still minister, the government introduced 3 new taxes. The Excise Amendment Act, Income Tax Amendment, and the Growth and Sustainability Levy. A lot of the people in your industry, like FABAG, AGI, were not happy with these taxes, yet they were passed anyway. Then there was also the very controversial e-levy, which was pitched as the antidote to IMF. It was pitched and implemented, very unpopular. If you say you have a solution to the tax conundrum, the question is, did you take any principled position against any of these taxes?
Yeah, if you know how the structure of government works, I cannot come and tell you what happens in our cabinet meetings and things like that. But because I represent the private sector in government, at least people in government know my position on taxes, because it is not sustainable. That's exactly why I'm speaking now to how to reform our tax regime. So you cannot assign responsibility for the type of taxes that were imposed to me as a Minister for Trade and Industry, and because basically it's a collective decision. But
to the extent that private sector manufacturers, AGI, will be harmed, some would feel you needed to probably have been a bit more strident in your position, if that's what you are asking us to believe, because the AGI and all the bodies you represent were very loud that these taxes were going to harm their businesses, and you are their spokesperson in the government. But we did not hear you speak against e-levy, for example.
When you say you did not hear me speak, very respectfully, Bernard, the government, we don't work like that in government. If you ask the AGI, Guta, they will tell you what my representations have been in support of them within government. But
so your argument did not hold. Within the government, the view you carried did not prevail.
But obviously, it's a collective decision. If, for example, cabinet decides that this is the kind of tax, basket of taxes that will be applied, the decision is a collective decision. It goes through cabinet, and more importantly, it goes through the House of Representatives, meaning Parliament. So if Parliament, in their collective wisdom, if they pass these taxes, then it is not an Alan's problem. I'm telling you what I believe in, what I've believed in before, and what I will do if I'm president of the country. So I'm speaking to what I believe in.
I'm trying to understand something. When the MPP came to office, we were told about the management team and the brain. So Dr. Bawumia mentions Yaosafo Mafu. He mentions your name. And then he mentions the late Anthony Akotose. And he mentions a few other names who are supposed to be the crack economic minds. I wonder how that team worked and whether... Because the state of the economy at the end of 2022 was pretty bad. All right? Does that team, that so-called crack team, do they not have to look at themselves closely in the mirror to apologize to Ghanaians for the state of the economy, at least until you left the MPP?
But I'm not the economic management team. You've mentioned so many other people. Yes, I'm key. And I'm saying that it is not prudent for any politician to come and sit on, let's say, public broadcast medium and start talking about the deliberations in let's say, the economic management team. So, yes, I've been part of it, but I'm saying that my views on many economic issues have been well known and have been documented.
Within the government, but not for the public.
No, I'm saying that I've said it publicly. But when you are within government, it's a different thing.
Some people should have resigned earlier.
Yes, but
have you heard that before?
Oh, I've heard
some
that
people
before.
say that if Alan is pitching himself to the public
Yeah.
as a different, an alternative.
Yes.
He probably should have left the MPP much earlier
Yeah.
when he felt that the economic direction of the country, for example,
Yeah.
prior to August 2022,
Yeah.
when everybody was urging the government to go for the IMF program and they were resisting,
Yeah.
some people felt that that was the time when you should have said, look,
Yeah.
I've had enough of this. You stayed till after the primary.
Yes, because, and I will say with all pride, that I was one of the few people in government who stood fiercely and encouraged that we go to the IMF. Like I said, it's not everything that we can discuss in public, but I've made this public information or public pronouncement that when the finance minister had decided that openly, and this is not something that I'm coining or something, that he had declared openly that we're not going to the IMF. And I was one of the few people who said that, looking at the circumstances of our economy, we had no choice, that we have to go to the IMF. And basically, we went after that. And that's why you realize that I was one of the only, I was the only senior member of the government that initially, I'm not saying throughout the period, but initially, I was the one who went on public medium or media to defend Ghana going to the IMF. So what else would you want me to do? At that point, yes, it is true. Some of my supporters were saying that, oh, the thing is collapsing. Why don't you leave now? But I don't operate like that. Because if I have been the champion of us going to the IMF so that we can ensure that the country does not collapse beyond repair. If I'm leading that effort, and that effort has now been, let's say, initiated, then would it make sense that immediately after fighting for that cause, then you exit?
Let's talk about the
reason.
import restrictions bill in 2023 October, just a month after you left. Your successor announced government's plans to lay the bill before Parliament to restrict a number of items, including offals, rice, and a number of things. I think that there are two reasons for this: balance of payment support and then stabilization of the currency, among other things like protection of domestic infant industry.
Yeah.
The AGI supported it. The Guta did not support it. What's your view on that? So sort of they shelved it in December. What's your view on this import restrictions? Because you didn't introduce such a thing in your time, did you?
Yeah, it's only because people did not know what was going on in the corridors of power. I took a memorandum to cabinet requesting government to take a firm decision on restricting imports.
Okay.
Yes, on restricting imports, selected imports, on restricting selected imports, and providing the basis for us conserving foreign exchange. This was when all the challenges with the economy were becoming so apparent. But I did a comprehensive study on the impact of those imports on our foreign exchange reserves and the extent to which a carefully designed and executed import substitution program can be the stimulus for growth for our. So I did such a detailed study that if you took, for example, rice, I was able to determine our current capacity, local capacity, not just for rice plantation development, but also milling capacity. So I knew that if we're importing, let's say, $1 million of rice, and we currently have the capacity only to produce, let's say, 1 100,000 worth of it. It means we have a gap of 900,000, which without any challenge we have to import. So I put together a program for enhancing the capacity of local rice producers year by year, and then use that to determine the level of restriction of imports over a period of time. So it was
so this was not a new thing that
and it was not going to be an abrupt thing.
Okay.
It was not going to be an abrupt thing. It was not as if we're going to just withdraw the.
So why didn't you see? So what happened? Why couldn't you see it through?
Why are you asking? Because
no. So I'm just saying. So basically, what he brought was what you started.
So yes, and it was a very comprehensive program.
Okay.
If you took sugar, for example, maybe you are importing X volume of sugar, and we can, within the next 3 years, produce this volume of sugar. So we now support people who want to go into sugar production. And then gradually, over a period of time, then we start reducing the level of import. So it was a graduated program.
Wow.
It was a graduated program. But we have no choice as a country that we have to work with the private sector and import it.
So you think we have to revisit this issue? It's not the fact that it's been shelved. We will have to go back to it.
Yeah, because we need the full package. I don't know exactly what was presented, but if the strategy that I was responsible for initiating, and if you ask some of the key people in AGI, they will tell you, I brought together some of the leading members of the private sector, and I introduced to them the opportunities in vegetable oil production, the opportunities in rice, sugar, all the areas of import restriction that we were attempting to implement, and then introduce them to the opportunities that are available over what period of time, and what government could do to support them to start producing to replace the imports. So this was a carefully thought through plan.
We'll come back and
that I should take credit for.
Well, it did not succeed because they shelved it in December.
Well, I don't know how it was explained.
We'll be back with more. This is The Point of View. We're talking to Alan Kyerematen. Stay with us. Welcome back to The Point of View. Tonight we've been chatting to the founder and leader of the Movement for Change and also independent presidential aspirant Alan Kyerematen.
Not aspirant, candidate.
Oh, okay. Has the EC declared who the candidates will be? I think that it is the EC that will let us know.
Okay, all right. Okay.
So yes, he's an independent presidential aspirant hoping to be a candidate. But be that as it may, we've been talking about the economy. So we've spoken about the two leading parties. We've spoken about the economy and how it's struggling. So how different is your economic management approach or economic policy from what we've seen over the past 30 years?
So first, let's talk about the content of the policy, because that's where the major difference comes from. I have come out with a very detailed, comprehensive economic program, which is contained in the Great Transformation Plan. I've submitted same to, I would say, public discourse and dialogue in the National Economic Summit. And this summit or conversation had participants from political parties, from the TUC or labor unions, from the private sector, from GUTA, that's from AGI, from GUTA, from the religious faith-based organizations, from, I would say, stakeholders from all over the country. So my economic policy prescriptions is what I have submitted for validation by let's say, by Ghanaians. And these are not just manifesto type promises. So for example, I am not making a promise that I will reduce inflation. I tell you specifically exactly what I will do to reduce inflation. So I have 152 policy prescriptions for dealing with the economic
152 policy prescriptions.
Yes, 152.
We haven't come to governance.
No.
This is just economy.
This is just economy.
152.
And it cuts across first the macro environment, which is basically inflation, interest rate, debt, so on and so forth. Then there's industry, there's industrial transformation. Then there's a revolution in agriculture, and then there's tourism. So you have 152 different policy solutions. This is not analyzing the problems. Very concise solutions spread across these four focus areas. Just on the economy.
And you're saying this is not manifesto?
No, this is on, because this is not just a promise. I gave you an example. If you say that I will reduce inflation, that is just a manifesto promise. But if you provide policy solutions as to how you address...
So give me 2 policy solutions to inflation.
Very simple. If you look at inflation, the biggest component of inflation in Ghana is food inflation. That's the biggest component.
Yeah.
And you know that inflation is calculated based on basket of goods.
Yeah.
And so food inflation is the single most important contributor to food. Now, to deal with food inflation, 2 basic policies that have to be in place. One is enhancing agricultural production and productivity. Because if you produce, let's say on a large scale, your unit price of foods will come down. So immediately tells you that our agricultural production regime would always lead to high food inflation. That is number one. Because the kind of production scale that is required to reduce the cost of food.
So how do you improve agricultural production?
So I'm coming. So number two is also transport and logistics cost. Because if, for example, it costs you to buy from the farm gate 100 cedis to buy 10 pieces or tubers of yam in Nigeria, and by the time you reach the Kumasi market or Accra market, that 100 cedis is now 1,000 cedis. Then it means that the distribution and transport and logistics costs is...
We understand that. So what we want to know is how...
So you have to reduce that. So
how will you reduce that?
No, but so basically you have to provide incentives to improve the distribution and marketing regime.
What about the production? What about the production point? No, sorry. Point 1 is production.
Yeah, production.
How will you improve agricultural production?
Yeah, agricultural production, number 1, is access to financing, agricultural financing, affordable financing. I know from the work that we've done that if you lend to the agricultural sector higher than 9%, you cannot sustain agricultural
so the interest rate threshold is 9 or below?
9 or below. So it means that it doesn't matter what you do. If you want to be competitive in agriculture, and that's how increase agricultural production and productivity, then you have to have a different agricultural financing scheme. So that's number 1. Number 2, irrigation.
I was going to ask you to elaborate. So are you going to bring in Islamic financing on the agri? I'm pushing the financing point. So what are you going to do to get, because people will say cost of funds are high.
Yes. So
a lot of the money coming from abroad is foreign money.
Yes.
So they even have FX losses. So the interest rate question is big. How are you going to get funds for farmers?
If for example you look at my prescriptions on the interest rates, first there's a reserve requirement by the Bank of Ghana for banks to put some of their loanable funds in this reserve. Now we've made a proposal that a certain percentage of that which lies with the central bank. At basically, they have not given the banks any interest on it. But then that can then be pushed to the commercial banks for on-lending to the, let's say, for agricultural financing at significantly below market rate. It's not a complicated program. So Second Reserve, you're asking the banks to deposit money there. It sits in the vault. Of course, there's a reason why it sits there. But then you can use that same money to
support agriculture at a lower interest rate. So that's one proposal.
That's one proposal. There are many other proposals.
Thank you for your time. Thank you. We're talking to Alan Kyerematen, who's the founder and leader of the GTP, but he's also an independent presidential aspirant, candidate when the EC declares him to be so. Be that as it may, it's been great talking to him as ever. Thank you for watching tonight's edition of the program. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.